and Bosnia in 1995. He was 46. Things Worth Fighting For is published by the Penguin Press. Visit penguin.com for more information. Former NBA player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is author of the new book, Brothers in Arms. It tells the story of the all-African-American Tank Battalion that spent more than 6 months on the front lines after D-Day. This talk from the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. is an hour.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has written an important and poignant account of the extraordinary story of the 761st Tank Battalion, the first all-black armored unit to see combat in World War II. Mr. Abdul-Jabbar became immersed in the battalion's history after learning that a family friend from New York City, Leonard Smith, was a veteran of the 761st. Working with writer Anthony Walton, he interviewed surviving members of the battalion to weave together their experiences, from basic training through the horrors of the battlefield to their post-war homecoming. Like other African American units, the 761st was never intended to see battle. Instead, it was created to placate black voters in newspapers and Eleanor Roosevelt, who used her husband's bully pulpit to advocate full use of African American military manpower. But with the Allies desperate for trained tank personnel, the 761st was called to duty in Europe in the summer of 1944. Despite encountering racial prejudice at every turn, the men of the 761st proved themselves again and again, fighting with great heroism in unimaginably harsh conditions. Brothers in Arms relates movingly how overcoming these suspicions and hardships instilled in these men an even stronger sense of identity and pride, and higher expectations of themselves and their society when they returned home. Our guest tonight is a 6-time NBA Most Valuable Player and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Giant Steps, as well as Kareem, Black Profiles in Courage, and A Season on the Reservation. Please welcome Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for your very nice reception. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm going to do a little bit of reading, but I need to get a copy of my book. They have them outside there. I gotta steal one. All right, I'll use this one. Thank you, sir. I think I should start by just giving you an idea of how I got involved in this whole process. A good friend of mine is a movie maker, and he had heard about the story of the 761st, and he got me involved in some events that were going to bring together survivors of the Holocaust and people who liberated them. And it was through this whole process that I got into this subject and discovered a number of very interesting things that shocked me and really rocked me as far as how small the world is. A little bit different from what I wore when I played basketball. But if I'm going to read to you, I got to have these. Leonard Smitty Smith was a transit police officer with my father, Al Alcindor, for more than 2 decades, beginning in the mid-1950s. They were good friends and would often hang out together after they had finished their shifts. Sharing an enthusiasm for the big band sounds of their youth, they most enjoyed going to the jazz clubs together to hear Lionel Hampton, Count Basie, Benny Carter, Maynard Ferguson, or the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Big Band. Smitty was like a surrogate uncle to me. He's one of those people who has an intense opinion on just about any subject, and he's never reluctant to share his views. The district office for the New York City Transit Authority Police in Upper Manhattan was located at the 145th Street subway station, and I often would have to change trains there to get to whatever game I was playing up in the Bronx. My dad had asked Smitty and the other fellow officers to keep an eye out for me, to make sure that I didn't get into any of those minor schoolboy hassles that occasionally turn ugly. Many a time, Smitty would suddenly materialize at my side as I waited on the platform. His first words were always, "Hey, young man." And I would turn and we would chat while I waited for my train. He would ask about my grades or how my mom was doing, or wisecrack about how badly the Knicks were playing. On one occasion, some of my friends were riding with me to check out that evening's game. Smitty gave them the once-over and told my friend Little Bob that should any trouble start, he wouldn't hesitate to shoot whoever was involved. Little Bob, not knowing Smitty's playful nature, took him seriously. He told Smitty that shooting a kid would get him fired from the police force. Smitty replied that Little Bob would be dead and so wouldn't get any satisfaction from that fact. It was a couple of days before I could convince Little Bob that Smitty had been pulling his leg. Black men in the New York City police force were unusual in the 1950s. My dad, Smitty, and the other few blacks in the Transit Authority police were pioneers. They had to endure the critical eyes of the public, the hostility of some of the white cops, and occasionally the resentment of black people who felt that they were sellouts. The fact that they were eventually able to earn the respect of both the police hierarchy and the black community says a lot about their achievement. My dad went on to become a sergeant and later a lieutenant, advancing through the ranks. Smitty was always supportive. He was proud to see a black cop take up the challenge and succeed. Smitty's personal story never surfaced while he and my dad were on the force together. And although he was a friendly face and welcome presence, I saw him as a grown-up. It never occurred to me that he even had a story. I never thought to ask about his life. I had no idea that Smitty, years before, had been a pioneer in a more significant context. When I left New York to go to California to attend UCLA and later play for the Milwaukee Bucks and Lakers, I didn't see Smitty for many years. All that changed one night in 1992 at Lincoln Center. The lights had just been dimmed, and I was rushing to find my seat in the concert hall. The featured event was a documentary film about a black tank unit that had fought in World War II. I'd been enlisted to assist a number of public speaking appearances in which members of the unit would describe their combat experiences, along with Holocaust survivors. I'd been interested for some time in the struggle of black veterans to gain the recognition they deserved, in part because of my father's experience in the Army. My dad was trained in artillery at Fort Bragg, specializing in the 155 millimeter howitzer, and was qualified and eager for an opportunity to fight the Germans. But like many African Americans in what was still a segregated army, he never got that chance. Most blacks were allowed only to train. It was hoped that this limited gesture would be enough to ensure the black community's support for the war effort. Accepting the inevitable, my dad chose to serve in a band unit and never left the States for the duration of his tour of duty. His experience in the Army had another unexpected benefit, however, because it was during his military service that he met my mom. He always said it was the high point of his time in uniform. African Americans in support roles perform important tasks from the outset of the war, including loading convoy ships, carrying out mess duties, driving supply trucks and ambulances through combat zones, and constructing military highways. Later, as Allied casualties mounted and replacements became an issue, some African American units were finally given a chance to fight. The 761st, the heroic Tank Battalion, chronicled in the documentary film I was about to watch, was one of those units. One special aspect of the 761st role in the war concerned their involvement in the liberation of some of the Nazi concentration camps. That night at Lincoln Center, Harlem Democrats Percy Sutton and Charles Rangel, who had both served with the Tuskegee Airmen, were in attendance, as were such notables as Lena Horne, Roy Haynes, Sidney Lumet, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, and other highly regarded members of New York's black and Jewish communities. As I hurried to my seat, I heard an oddly familiar voice call out, "Hey, young man." Something about that voice transported me back in time to my teenage years. I turned, and there was Leonard Smith. "What are you doing here?" I asked him in surprise. Smitty replied that he had been a member of the 761st. With the lights flickering on and off, signaling the imminent start of the film, we had to get to our separate seats. Running into Smitty after all those years was a pleasant shock, but what I saw in the film left me speechless. Smitty had been involved as a tank gunner in some of the most intense fighting of World War II. He had fought in 5 countries and been awarded a Bronze Star for valor. When I found Smitty after the screening, I was unable to adequately express how deeply I'd been affected by what I had just seen. Being exposed to a side of a person you've known that has been hidden or ignored for so long can be very disorienting. Smitty had never mentioned his war record, even to my dad. In the years since I've learned of his service, I've come to find out that many soldiers, both black and white, who returned from the war, never mentioned the ordeals they faced in combat. They all seemed to feel that they were just doing their jobs and deserved no special acknowledgement for performing their duty. Unfortunately, some of the events referred to in the documentary that I saw that night, Liberators, Fighting on Two Fronts in World War II, had not been adequately researched. The film was produced with the best of intentions, but crucial facts were incorrect or transposed. The resulting controversy tarnished the record of one of the most highly decorated and courageous combat units in the war, and made me aware of the need to tell the 761st story in a way that would attempt, insofar as possible, after almost 60 years, to set the record straight. That evening in 1992 sent me off on a 12-year journey to find out more about the battalion, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. I began to collect memorabilia, which included articles and the first book written about the 761st, Come Out Fighting, by war correspondent Tres Van Anderson, as well as photographs of battalion members and the unit in action. A later book, the 761st Black Panther Battalion in World War II, written by Joe W. Wilson, the son of a unit member, became an illuminating and invaluable resource. I continued to research the 76 combat record, the records of the infantry divisions they fought beside, the history of African Americans in the United States military, and the history of the Second World War in general, so that what the men witnessed and achieved could be seen and appreciated in the largest possible context. I began to arrange and conduct a series of audio and video interviews with several of the battalion's surviving members. Beginning in 2002, I worked along with Anthony Walton to arrive at a way of telling a story that would reflect the courage, honor, and integrity of these men. In telling the story of the 761st Tank Battalion, we have chosen to focus on 3 members of the 761st in particular. In doing so, we in no way mean to diminish the bravery and contributions of the other soldiers in the unit. Rather, these 3 men serve as guides into and through the experience of a distinguished group of American citizens and soldiers during one of the most difficult periods of our nation's history. I believe theirs is a story that should be known. Thank you. So that's all I'm going to read right now. I'd love to hear some of your questions, and we can do the Q&A. There's no questions. No. I'm sure there are. There are microphones here and here, and just step up to the mic.
I don't need a mic, Kareem.
It doesn't sound like you do. Okay.
I was very excited when I heard that you did this, because there's so many things that you never hear about. I myself am of the Jewish extraction, and I remember taking history, never hearing about what the Hebrews did to the Greeks, the Romans, and the Phoenicians. You never were taught that. You were never taught about the movie Glory, what the blacks did in the Civil War, the Tuskegee Airmen, Pearl Harbor being bombed. But the greatest thing that I want to say is something you did personally. Not just your points and not just your rings. The thing that you developed yourself, and I want this room really to applaud Kareem for this. It's a Latin term that I thought of tonight. Kareem developed the Skycius Hooksius, the sky hook, a truly unstoppable shot. Nobody ever blocked it, And Kareem, you were the most incredible player that I'd ever seen. You used to kill my bullets. I hated it. The late Marv Brooks, I used to listen to El Sindor, and then I listened to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I have the greatest amount of respect for you. I'm glad you are where you are with the NBA. I hope you go further. I marched to a beat of a different drummer. I was a fat lady for the Bullets. The year they lost the championship. I wish you all the best in the world. I hope this is a success. I hope people read this because people have to know of untold stories. And again, I was so excited when I came down here, and by the way, the red line was slow tonight, so we came in just as you started to speak. And best of luck to you, Kareem.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure watching you over these years, and I still think you could waste some of those guys out there.
You're very kind. Thank you, sir.
How you doing, sir?
That's fine.
Is there one chapter in this book that you really, really need to go back and do some more research on and think about some of the things you didn't put in the book that you could do now?
No, there isn't. I feel that I was very thorough, and we got everything in the book that needed to be in there. We didn't get excessive about anything, and I don't think that we omitted anything. I'm very confident that I did a good job. I've already heard from one of the gentlemen that we interviewed extensively. He's checked the book out and he loves it, and that was the only thing I was worried about. So I'm very confident that it will be received both by the men in the unit and the public, and they will understand that it's everything it should be.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
I've really enjoyed reading the book, and it's probably the fastest I've ever gone through a book, knowing that I could be here tonight. And I would like to say, through the character of Lenny, you have brought to us a wonderful story. And I think in particular, I'm a former librarian, I think the book can be used on many fronts. If somebody wants to know the history of the African American in this tank battalion, if they even want to know what it's inside a tank, I mean, you've really gotten us in every inch of that tank, every part of their clothing, and even the details about his helmet. One would not think that you could use a helmet for that many devices. So can I ask you, how much of that was Lenny talking? Did he become, it sounds like he never became old in that book. Was he
he's still
young?
not old now.
I know. Yeah.
He'll be 80 this year.
I figured that.
And he has a girlfriend that's like 45. And he's an incredible person. And he's still just lively, and
I can tell. Yeah.
he's like he's 50 years old. And I'm 57 now. You know, it's amazing.
He knew everything about this tank. Do you still feel that when you were watching him that it came alive for him again somehow?
I don't think he's ever really forgotten it. I think it's been like in the front of his mind, not in the back of his mind. Mm-hmm. But I have to compliment you. The book just came out today, so you've read it since this morning. My hat's off to you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Bill Royce. I'm a member here. But I have a question. You've talked about the role this group had in the liberation of the camps and so forth. And I don't want to spoil the read of the book, but I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, I'll be glad to.
Thanks.
The liberation of, what the gentleman is referring to is the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp. It was in three parts. The Dachau main camp, and it had two satellite camps, Gunskirchen and Mauthausen. And the 761st Tank Battalion was just advancing with infantry and air support across an area of southern Germany outside of Munich. They didn't know what was in front of them. They came upon a German installation, and they also got some information from their infantry support that there were a lot of SS around, and they really had a bad attitude, and they had encountered some serious resistance. One of the wing units, Sergeant Ellington's tank liberated a group of young men who had escaped from a German column. When the Allies started approaching the Dachau concentration camp, the Germans panicked and tried to drive all the Jews out of the camp and take them to some distant field and kill them in the field and leave the bodies there and make their escape. Well, because we had total air superiority, as soon as our Air Force saw a German column on the road, they strafed it. And in all that confusion, several of the people that had been inmates in Dachau ran away. And they ran across the field. The Germans shot at them, killed some of them, but a young man, Mr. Pissar, and about 5 or 6 of his friends got beyond where the Germans could kill them, and they made it to a farmhouse. They were in that farmhouse for about a day when they heard fighting outside, and it was a tank fighting the SS. And they looked out, and they saw the tank, and the tank had a star on it. And that was kind of weird. They'd never seen an American tank. So they watched what happened. The battle ensued. It didn't last very long. The tank was overwhelmed the German resistance and either killed them or drove them away. And then these black guys got out of the tank. And these people had never seen black people. They thought that they were chimney sweeps. People who go and clean chimneys end up with soot all over them, their bodies and clothes, and they're all black. And they came and just were in amazement. Who are these people? What's this all about? And they realized that these were Americans. And that was their liberation. Back at the front gate, Smitty's tank, which was run by Mr. McBurney, who was one of the principal people that I interviewed for this. His tank, Smitty's tank, was the first tank through the gate, through the main gate at Dachau. The Germans fired on them. There was a brief firefight. They used the cannon and their 50 caliber machine gun and cleared the Germans away from the front gate and crashed through the gate. Smitty's tank was the first tank through the gate at Dachau. And they got inside, and to hear it, even to this day, my heart patters a little bit because I can hear Smitty and Preston McNeil telling me about what they saw, because they got inside the camp and there were people coming out, and Smitty said it looked like bundles of rags that could walk, and these people that had just been brutalized and murdered started coming out from where they'd been, and the Germans went out the back of the compound, and at that point they got out and explored the place and just saw a whole lot of horrible stuff that reminded them of lynchings in the South. Preston McNeil talks about how he went into one room where the Nazis had been conducting some of those horrific medical experiments on the inmates, and he said he saw a jar full of eyeballs, and he couldn't comprehend that type of inhumanity. It's still to this day something that makes your skin crawl to hear them describe these events. They were only in there for about 2 or 3 hours because they had to keep on moving with the advancement of the Allied push, and they kept on moving east until they met the Ukrainian forces outside of Steyr, Austria, and that's where their war stopped, right there in May of 1945. But that's what happened at Dachau. Yes, sir.
Jabbar, you've done a tremendous amount of work to tell these untold stories, and I'm wondering, you being one of the foremost students of jazz in America, in my opinion, do you envision any future writing work on dealing with some of the untold stories of jazz and music?
Well, I don't know if I can do that. That's tough. I was a historian, not a musician. So, student of, absolutely. But I would like to do the story of the Underground Railroad. I'd like to write a novel about that. That would be an exceptional story and something that really hasn't been dealt with here in America, because there are still too many people that are emotional about it. people whose forebears had owned slaves. They're very sensitive about that subject. People whose forebears were abolitionists, they're very passionate about it. And it's something that white Americans have never really discussed all the way out to the end, to its logical end. So that would be something. But simultaneously with doing this book, we have done a screenplay. And I hope to get a movie based on my book on the screen, hopefully in the next couple of years or so. Right now, we're talking to Denzel Washington's office about working on the screenplay with us and helping us get the movie done. Yes, sir?
Yes, first of all, I wanted to, echoing what somebody said earlier, thank you for writing this book. I've consider myself a student of history, and I'd never heard at all about this unit, and it's something that, as you mentioned, a forgotten part of history that just never finds its way in any other history books. I had two questions for you, actually. The three characters, or the three gentlemen who you focus on, was that, out of all your research, did you find the most colorful characters to stick with, or was part of it that certainly some of them have died in battle or since then, and they were the most convenient to write about? Just what was it that made you focus on these three individuals?
Well, I focused on these three individuals because it was Smitty and two of his best friends, and they all were from New York, and they all spend a lot of time in New York. So I was able to get all three of them in the same room at one time, and that was a key. And they remained close after the war, and they went to a lot of the functions that they had. They had reunions just about every year. Early in the 50s, there were hundreds that showed up. Nowadays, it's only 30 or 40 of them still alive. So these guys, they're still alive, they're healthy, and their memories are quite sharp. So I focused on them, and it was the easiest, as you said, most convenient to get these guys with the accurate information in one place at one time.
I was also wondering if you could mention, after the accomplishments they went through, just describe some of the racism they dealt with once they came back to this country, whether their accomplishments had been acknowledged at all at this point, or... Their accomplishments weren't acknowledged because
General Patton's, his chain of command, the people in his chain of command were mainly Southerners, and they didn't feel like acknowledging the accomplishments of blacks. So all of the paperwork that were filed to give these guys commendations, the Silver Star or the Congressional Medal of Honor, got, quote, lost, unquote. And it wasn't until Jimmy Carter decided in the late 70s to give them the Presidential Unit Citation that they got their first recognition, and that was some 35 years after the fact. President Clinton gave Reuben Rivers the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1998. And he was probably the last person in the group that deserved it, that didn't get it. But it took that long for the process to work. The Army did a pretty good thing in realizing that there was some underhandedness involved in all of this, and they reopened the case and made sure that these guys received their just recognition from the Army. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I was wondering, because aside from the book that you've just published, and I know that you also had an exhibit at a Harlem museum that dealt with a Black Army unit.
That was the Buffalo Soldier exhibit.
Right, correct. Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously a deep interest of yours. You have a lot of knowledge of the subject. And I know you also spend a lot of time analyzing and putting forth your own analysis of African-American athletes in sports. And not to compare heroics, but in terms of their treatment, injustices, their feats being under-recognized or underappreciated, do you sense a strong correlation or resemblance between African-American members of the military and African-American athletes?
I wouldn't equate the two because it's such a different field. And athletics has become such a public arena for Black Americans, a successful public arena for them. I don't think that there's any comparison. Actually, the armed forces, after Jimmy Carter's affirmative action campaign, has become really the most integrated aspect of American life. because he made it into a real meritocracy. So I think the Army really has led the way. Frederick Douglass, one of the things that he said is our people should join the Army. Once they get the eagle on their shoulder and learn to carry a rifle, they get respect. And I think he was right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Sir, I've only read the first couple of pages of the book, so I don't pretend to know what's in it, but I'm falling in love with these guys already. And I'm only at about page 9.
Well, thank you.
I wanted to ask you, though, and I know I'll find it in the book, but can you tell us what kind of men these are as far as you are concerned? And tell us something about their feelings these many years later. Is there anger, pride, something of that background?
The feeling that they have at this point is one of pride, and they really understand that they helped each other get through something very difficult, and they survived it and went on to thrive in America. Smitty became a police officer, and he retired, and there's no bitterness there. That's what really gets me. They're very well-adjusted people. They're not angry about anything. They know they did something, and they know that eventually they're going to get some recognition. And that's why I'm so happy about getting the phone call that I got from Mr. McBurney, because it means that I nailed it, and I told the story the way it needs to be told. But these guys are just beautiful human beings, and they don't want any special recognition. They just want people to understand that they were there and they did their job. Yes, sir.
How you doing, Kareem? First off, I'd like to say, I haven't read the book yet, but I have visited the Dachau concentration camp many times, from all my years living in Germany. And, one thing I can say is that this is the first time that I've heard, when you talked about, the tanks crashing through the gates of Dachau, and it's a very sad place. I mean, you have to actually go there to see how sad it is. You can feel the atmosphere and so forth. It's very sad. And I've visited the place several times, but throughout the during all my visits, I've never, the film presentations and so forth, I've never seen anything was ever mentioned, about, this unit, as far as, at the tourist center and so forth, at the concentration camp. And I appreciate, this type of information being put out and everything, because I think it's something that people really need to know. My questions are, I have a friend, a good friend, who's a very big fan of yours, and he wants to know whether you'll be doing this review in the Charlotte area. And the second question is, I noticed Jackie Robinson and everything. How long was Jackie in the unit?
Well, I'll be in Atlanta on Thursday.
Okay.
And concerning Jackie Robinson, he was in a Buffalo Soldier unit. He was in the 9th Cavalry, and he decided he was going to transfer into the 761st, so he came over as their morale officer. And he was with them in Louisiana and Fort Hood, Texas. Well, it was Camp Hood at that point. And he got into a beef with everybody because he was sitting on the bus one day talking to one of the wives of one of the men, and she was very fair-skinned. The bus driver looked at him and said, "Stop talking to that white woman and get to the back of the bus." And Jackie, most of you have heard of him. He didn't take that. So he told the guy off and told him that if they called him the N-word in several different forms. He told him if they called him that, he was going to break the bus driver's back. Well, the bus driver went and got the MPs, and Jackie had to end up going to court-martial. While he was dealing with the court-martial, the unit got called over to Europe. So he had to stay and deal with the court-martial. When the court-martial was over and he beat it, he had a choice either to stay, rejoin his unit, or take an honorable discharge. And he was tired of the harassment, so he left. He'd had some really bad experiences. While he was in the 9th Cavalry at Fort Riley, he tried to get on the baseball team. Pete Reeser, who's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, he was on the baseball team at that point at Fort Riley. And he remembered the incident because he said one day a colored lieutenant came up to the baseball field and wanted to get on the team, and we had to tell him to go away. That was Jackie Robinson. So it's there's a lot of ironies in here, but that was his experience there, and fortunately he didn't go see combat in Europe, and he had things to do after the war that we all appreciate and admire him for.
Okay.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I actually just have two simple questions. One is, and I know that we talked about this a little bit earlier, you like history, but you don't think that you're going to write about jazz or music. Are there any other genres that you think maybe you might try?
I'm sorry?
Like as far as your book goes, do you think that you might try writing any other topics, any other genres? I mean,
oh, yes. But most of what I want to write about has to do with black history.
Yeah.
But jazz is certainly a part of black history. I just haven't put it together, and I've seen really good movies on jazz.
Sure. Well, I didn't know if maybe you might pursue that a little bit more and maybe write, I don't even know, I mean, just another type of book besides just maybe a history.
Well, I'm thinking about it, but
yeah.
I want to promote this and see what happens. And the movie, we got to do the movie. And
You have big plans.
I got plans to do the movie, and I'm going to be the executive producer if it gets done. So I got some work ahead of me. So I got a little bit of time.
Yeah, well, that's true. My other question actually was, in any way did you correlate this with the the World War II memorial opening at the end of the month?
No, that's totally by coincidence. Yeah, it's totally by coincidence.
It's kind of appropriate.
Yeah, I'm really, it's kind of serendipitous the way all these pieces have fallen together.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Welcome to Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
My question is, I heard you speak this morning on the morning talk show, and you spoke of their battle theme as a result of a prize fight. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Okay, the motto for the 761st Tank Battalion was "Come Out Fighting," and they took that motto because when Joe Louis was getting ready to fight Max Schmeling for the second time in 1938, he was interviewed. It was a national radio interview, and they said, "Joe, what are your plans on when you fight Schmeling this time? He beat you the first time." And Joe said, "Well, I'm going to come out fighting." So that was something that these guys seized on, and they said, we should be brutally efficient like Joe Louis. And they were. The Germans, after a while, were scared of them and knew that they were on the field. And I think it was Axis Sally started directing anti-propaganda at them. She'd play jazz music and say, "Hey, you black tankers, why don't you go home? They're rioting in Detroit. Get out of Europe." But what she meant was you're killing too many German soldiers. Yes, sir.
My name is Roger Maben. I'd like to say I've always admired your demeanor and how you carried yourself as an athlete, as a person, and also your pursuit as being and trying to be a scholar athlete, which most athletes don't today. Well, more so now they didn't when you came along. But I have one personal question that always been bugging me for years. How do you feel about the fact that Coach Wooden never wanted to address you, or does not address you by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? He always referred to you as Lou Alcindor. Does that offend you in any way?
No, that's not true. He calls me Kareem.
It is. I have never heard him call you that. Call you by your Muslim name.
No,
now I feel better to know that he has done that.
Especially when I see him face to face, he always.
Oh, he does.
Yeah.
Okay, that answers.
Sometimes, he'll refer to me and he'll be talking about me, and it'll slip that he'll call me Louis. But he's family. I have to indulge that. He's again like an uncle or a surrogate father, and I can accept that from him because it's not coming from here. He forgets sometimes.
Because I've never been a person, but every time I see him doing a course of interview, he always referred to you as Lou Alcindor or Lou. I just never. Right. But he has done it. He does do it.
No, he's pretty good about it.
Okay, all right.
He's how old is he now? He'll be 94 in October.
Oh, the count.
Yeah. So we got to indulge him a little bit.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Ivy K. Pendleton, and I'm an alum of Tuskegee University. So I'm very familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen as well as the intensity of black history as a whole overall. There are things that we have to learn in our curriculum, not because we just took the class, but, you know, as opposed to going to high school where the majority of our history has been white history. So I would love to commend you on illuminating those aspects of our social plight, because they also filter into, you know, our economic plight and everything overall in the black community by presenting this literature that you have presented. So what effect would you like to see your book have on the African American community and this positive aspect of it?
Well, for me, I want black Americans to understand that this is their country, and they've done more than enough to earn full citizenship, and they should act like they belong here. This is their country. They should be patriotic, and they should be able to take advantage of all of the benefits of being American citizens. And a lot of times, black Americans don't feel that that is their right. And that's something that when they read something like this, they will understand, hey, we belong here. We wouldn't have an America if it wasn't for black military men. They started fighting in the Revolutionary War, and they distinguished themselves in every time they've been called on since the Revolutionary War. So if black teenagers or black kids can take this book and achieve that understanding, I will have done my job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Kareem. I'd like to ask two questions. The film you saw in 1992 at Lincoln Center, what did you find lacking or wanting? What was inaccurate about the film? And the second question, it looks like this book will be very successful. You're pursuing turning it into a movie. You have plans to write another book. What about your future in basketball? I know you joined the Knicks a few months ago. You've always talked about a desire to coach. So do you plan to remain in the game? Thank you.
Okay. Your first question was, you want me to answer what was your first question? Okay. What happened in 92 that caused all the controversy was the fact that they had the Buchenwald concentration camp was liberated by a black unit, but it wasn't the 761st. It was the 183rd Combat Engineers. But they got that fact mixed up. They just got it crossed over. They got like the wires crossed, where they had a gentleman from the 183rd Combat Engineers talking like he and the 761st were involved in the liberation of Buchenwald. That didn't happen. They also showed Smitty and another member of the 761st accompanying a gentleman who had been in Buchenwald, and that was someplace that they hadn't been. So it gave the general impression that the 761st Tank Battalion had been in Buchenwald when they weren't there. And a number of Jewish groups seized upon that misstatement of fact and said that the 761st was a fraud, which was not the case. But it really left a sour taste in their mouth to be challenged like that. And the fact that the people who did the documentary makers did not check out all the facts all the way down to the last detail. That was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that I nailed. And I got help from the United Jewish Congress and other people in Israel that know all the facts and have all the relevant data. And we nailed it. And I'm sure that the things in my book are accurate and won't be challenged that way. So that's what happened then. Now, as far as me with the Knicks, I'm waiting to hear from my boss, Isaiah Thomas. I don't know what they're going to have me do right now. I'm scouting and doing a little bit of assistant coaching, and I don't know what they're going to have me do. If and when we do get to do the movie, I would take a leave of absence to do the movie and try to keep that job, because basketball is part of my life and I love it. But this is very important to me, and this is my passion. The sport that I was most passionate about was baseball. I rooted for Brooklyn, so it's really funny that I made it as a basketball player, because I had dreams of replacing Gil Hodges at first base. Yes, sir.
How you doing, Kareem? How did it feel being on the other side of the interview process. I know you were accused of being a difficult interview in your day. And did you have a problem with guys realizing that they're talking to you and kind of putting a little more mustard on the story?
Well, no, I didn't have a problem with that. I just got tired of being asked the same questions night in and night out. So I tried to figure out ways to get out of the locker room before they got in there. And, I wanted to go home and see my girlfriend, actually. So, but that's, I got a bad reputation for that. And it was something that I had to overcome. And it had nothing to do with me being antisocial. But, I just didn't have the right people skills to handle that diplomatically and politically. So that's something I had to learn, and hopefully I've learned it.
Okay. And at what point, after 12 years of research, what point did you say, this is enough?
I only did 3 years research. I thought about it for 9 years, though.
You thought about it? Okay. I got it.
I thought about it for 9 years, and I stayed in touch with Smitty. Smitty came out to L.A. to visit my dad. My dad's senile now. He didn't even remember Smitty. But Smitty came out and visited us for a week and everything. And, just reconnecting with him was good for me, just because he was like family. And then 3 years ago, I decided, I got to do this. I found a publisher and started to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello. In doing the research for this book and writing this book, and I'm hearing you talk about in many of the questions that you're answering, recognition, it's often spoken about that you haven't received the recognition that you deserve by the NBA as far as maybe getting a coaching position or maybe a front office job. Do you feel that the research you've done and just the plight of these men and other research you've done in the past, has that helped you in your life or maybe given you some strengths to draw on?
Well, let me put it to you like this. I talked to Smitty and McBurney and Preston McNeil about, let's say, one incident. They had to stay in the tank for 36 hours. They had to eat out of their helmets. They had to use their helmets for a latrine, and they had to keep an eye out for the German infantry to make sure that they didn't infiltrate this area that they were. The Germans were calling in artillery strikes, trying to hit their tank. Their tank kept the Germans at bay, and they did what they had to do. But they were in their freezing sub-zero temperatures, the worst winter in 35 years in Europe. And they did that. Now, being bumped out of bounds by Wes Unseld does not compare to that in any way, shape, or form, As in terms of heroics, I'm a pipsqueak compared to what these guys did. I mean that. It has, there's no correspondence there. Mine was a peacetime endeavor to entertain people. These guys were out there fighting for their lives.
As far as what's happening right now, present day in your life, do you feel as though, just in speaking of recognition, that you're able to draw on? Obviously, those are some things that are very adverse conditions, but just as far as, and maybe you may not feel as though there are recognitions that you should have right now. But it's often spoken about, if you're watching TNT, Charles Barkley, they'll often say, oh, well, Kareem doesn't get what he deserves. Do you feel as though you've been able to draw back on some of those things to maybe to say, hey, this isn't as bad as Smitty might have experienced?
Charles has been very kind, and I've gotten enough recognition. So I'm not, it's not like they forgot about it. They can't forget about me. Right. My name's in the record book too many places. So I can live with it. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Sandy Lara, and I actually had one question until you mentioned baseball. But my first question is, in your opening remarks, you said that your surrogate uncle, Leonard Smitty, never really mentioned to your father about his past. I mean, about his experiences in World War II, even though they're good friends. Do you have any idea why, or just why you didn't share that information with your dad?
I think that it was a whole generation. All of those guys from that generation had to do something during World War II. They all were drafted, so if you were an able-bodied person, you had to go and do something for the government. So they all had an obligation, and they all fulfilled it, and none of them ever complained about it. That's the thing. They're so humble and at peace with it. And it's amazing. Tom Brokaw calls them the greatest generation. I got to agree with that. They're awesome human beings. I get teary-eyed sometimes thinking about it because they don't want anything.
I'm looking forward to reading the book.
I think you'll enjoy it.
My other statement, since I wouldn't have brought this up, but since you mentioned baseball, I don't know if you remember, I'm one of the twins from Inwood, and my father was your coach in Little League, and we played on the same team, Sandy and Peter Lara.
Oh, my goodness.
And we played on the same Little League team, baseball team, and if he put his mind to it, he could have been Gil Hodges. We played Little League ball together.
Well, I wish I could. It's good to see you again. Thanks for coming out. Somebody, Peter Nally or Malley sent me a picture of us. And Gene Coyle. Remember Gene Coyle?
I was looking for pictures, but my brother has them in New York.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mickey and Kenny Coyle and Peter Malley and those guys. And there I am in my Little League uniform.
I might be one of those pictures. The two of us.
I'm going to go. I'll go home and check it out. Yes,
you
sir.
mentioned collecting memorabilia. Is that something you have continued to do, and are you storing it? Or are you displaying it?
I displayed it, and then I did an exhibition up at the Schomburg Museum in New York and realized that, geez, I got my living room back. So at this point, I'm going to store it until I can find someplace, that wants to exhibit it permanently, and we'll treat it in the right way. But in order to study the subject, if you can get your hands on things, it's a lot easier than if you just have to imagine things. So I just pursued that because I saw too many cowboy movies and TV shows when I was a kid, and that always fascinated me, and I always wanted to find out the facts behind the myth.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
One more time. You're a jazz buff. I consider the player of today, and I'm a bit of a jazz buff myself. Mike? Yes. Okay. I've had the honor of meeting Dizzy Gillespie, Count Basie, Joe Pass, and some of the others. I spent 22 years in the music business. The player today is not like the player of yesteryear. There's no Charlie Parkers, there's no Lester Youngs, there's no Sonny Stitts. They don't have the soul. They didn't go out and blow at 3 o'clock in the morning in a room filled with cigarette smoke. These guys today, to me, are too sterile. Marsalis, to me, is too sterile. Joshua Redman is too sterile. They don't have the same soul. And somebody should delve into that these book-learned cats might be good, but they don't play with the same thing that they did with 40, 50 years ago.
Well, the thing of it is, I feel that the edge that was there in Dizzy's music and
Right.
Thelonious and those guys, after the Civil Rights Movement, there was a lot less stuff for black people to be angry about. And that is reflected in the jazz that we have today.
But a lot of that music, I listen to Blakey, I listen to Silver, even though it shows anger, shows originality, and there's only a certain amount of notes anyway.
There's hope and there's love in there also. And
Yeah, I want you to research something which is the most profound statement ever made, and Duke Ellington made it, and I think you know the statement. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, do-wot, 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 do-wot. And to me, that is the most profound thing, and it encompasses everything. And I want to say this, Kareem. I've seen you on TV, and I hope everybody in this room agrees with this. This is one of the most interesting men or human beings I have ever heard speak in my life. And I would sit here all night listening to you talk. I used to sell all that stuff, microphones, speakers, and when I watched when you first started, you looked a little, to me, uncomfortable. I mean, that's how I felt. Hold it in your hand all night and keep talking.
I will do that. And
Keep talking. You're the best.
as we are here in Washington, D.C., I'm sure Duke Ellington is somewhere smiling and saying, "We love you madly." Yes, ma'am.
Was it difficult to find a publisher for your book? Were they open to the idea?
They were very open to the idea. It was no problem at all. The people at Broadway is a subsidiary of Doubleday, and they were wide open to it. I had one meeting and got a call back in 3 days saying it's a green light.
That's great. And what about the movie? Do you think you're getting the same feeling?
We've already got a movie company behind us, and now we hope that if Denzel wants to be involved in the project, it's going to get a green light. So hopefully we'll hear about that in the next 2 weeks. You can't see inside my shoes. I got my toes crossed. Everything is crossed. I'm hoping that this happens.
Well, good luck.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hi. I was wondering if you could share any comments you've heard from members of the unit about their experiences in Europe and how they were treated as Black Americans there as in comparison to in the United States.
It's very interesting to hear what they had to say about how they were treated in Europe, because the Europeans, not having been raised in racist theory like Americans are, they were very open-minded, and the Europeans really felt that black culture was something interesting. In the 20s and 30s, jazz was like a rage in Europe. At one point, Hitler was having problems because boogie woogie was so popular, and he said, this is jungle music and we can't listen to it, but the Germans liked it anyway. So Hitler had to end up allowing boogie woogie music in Germany, and certain people who resisted the Third Reich would meet at jazz dances and stuff. It was this very interesting little subplot to things. But Smitty and these guys would tell me sometimes they would go through a village, and some people would come out and say, look, we got records by Count Basie. And they would this is in Europe during the war, and our culture really had penetrated into Europe, and Europeans were curious about our culture. It wasn't a situation where they automatically reacted in a racist fashion. It was only when white American soldiers would resent the black troopers associating with white females in Europe that the friction would arise, and they would do things to try to make sure that didn't happen. But for the most part, the Europeans were very open-minded. After the war, Smitty and those guys went back a number of times to some of the towns that they liberated, and they would show up on a bus, and the people in the town would close the town, and they'd party for 3 or 4 days, and just to show their appreciation. Some of that is in the documentary. The documentary is worth watching if you understand what's wrong with it. The name of the documentary is Liberators, Fighting on Two Fronts in World War II. It's by Bill Miles and Nina Rosenblum. They're the people who produced it. So you can get that, and I would suggest that you look at that, because it has some good footage in there. You just have to understand what's not accurate in it. All right, we've got time. This is our last question, and I'm going to have to wrap up here.
One very quick question. The country is currently at war, and this is a book about World War II. Do you see any particular message in your book that would be applicable today, given our current situation?
Geez, I really don't see any parallel. A terrorist war is so different from us being attacked at Pearl Harbor and then going to war against the Third Reich. I don't think there's any comparable situation. We're in a very tough situation here because this is all about ideas and not about people trying to grab land. It's about ideas, and can we reach a situation where we can live and let live with the Islamic world? And I hope that does happen. As a Muslim and as American, I'm torn there. I don't want to see either side hurt in all of this, and it bothers me that this is going on right now. I hope it's resolved quickly and to everybody's benefit. I want to thank you for your attention. You've been wonderful on this, and I hope you enjoy the book. I'm going to be right here and sign books for everybody. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is author of Brothers in Arms. It's published by Broadway Books on the web at broadwaybooks.com.
Monica Langley tells the story of Citigroup chairman Sandy Weil in her book, Tearing Down the Walls. It was the subject of this Book Notes interview from last year. The program lasts about an hour.